Hi all, Mark Boulay here. Looking forward to working with you for another module in this unit EDF 5623. This week, for this particular module, we're looking at the question of education and behaviour change for sustainability. And there's two things that I'd like you to get out of this particular session. The first is a little bit of a better understanding of what we mean by behaviour change, particularly within the context of sustainability. And the second thing is to explore its relationship with that of education. Now, why do we, for a unit that has to do with deepening education and sustainability, need to be thinking about behaviour change and its relationship to education? And that's because, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. Just to give you an overview of what we're going to be looking at for the next 10 minutes or so, is I'll provide you with an overview, conceptual overview of this module, take you through the readings, and then highlight what the different learning activities associated with this module will be. So to go back to the question of why should we be thinking about education and behaviour change? When you look at a lot of the literature and the materials and the programs which combine education for sustainability, one of the learning outcomes that a lot of these programs, whether it's a not-for-profit program or a government program or even a formal education program around sustainability, one of the learning outcomes that they look for is changes in the behaviours of participants or students. Now, they could look for other outcomes around awareness and skills and capacity and so forth, but often this idea of a change in behaviour in relation to sustainable lifestyles or habits or other things is one of the intended outcomes of an education for sustainability program. And what I want to do, as I said before, is explore the relationship between those two concepts. And to be clear, when we talk about behaviour and we talk about behaviour change, what we're looking at is people's actions. So generally, if you accept the premise that we think, we feel, and we act, when we talk about behaviour, when we talk about behaviour change, we're talking about people's actions. So it's things that you can see, things that they're doing. Now that may have something to do with what they have happening in their head, what they're thinking. It may have something to do with what they're feeling in their heart. But when we talk about behaviour, we're talking about people's actions. And that's important to be thinking about, because essentially, when we talk about education for sustainability and having a behaviour change outcome, it's education that leads to particular actions. And some people have problems with that, and others are comfortable with that. Now, when we look at this issue of developing an education for sustainability program that has an intended outcome of behaviour change, this is the program logic that a lot of those education programs follow. And the first is we need to provide people with knowledge or information about a particular issue, whether that's climate change or biodiversity or social justice issues or something similar. That will then change people's attitude or give them great awareness of the issue, and their attitudes will change. And that will then lead to a change in their behaviours, and they will behave in ways that are appropriate to the particular issue they have more knowledge about now. Now, just thinking from your own experiences, how often do you see this particular program logic actually follow through? And based probably on some of your own experiences, as well as a growing body of literature from health promotion, from sustainability education and others, you'll see that this often does not hold, in fact, that there is a gap between people's knowledge about a particular issue and how they will then behave in certain circumstances. And this is what the first of the readings that I've given to you this week looks at. And it looks at the question of, does education in the form of providing people with knowledge and information actually lead to behaviour change? And the paper is written by an academic from the States called Aychek Eisen, who's a psychologist. And he and his colleagues make essentially the argument that education doesn't always lead to behaviour change. So I'd like you to read that particular article. Now, for me, the main message that comes from this article can be paraphrased in this slide here. And it's an important one, and it led really for me for a change in my own thinking about this particular issue. And they argue that many educational campaigns are focused on providing people with information. And it's expected that once people have an understanding of the issue, they will engage in the desirable behaviour. Now, this could be for sustainability, it could also be for health promotion and for other issues. But information is neither necessary nor sufficient, and indeed it can be irrelevant to decision making and behaviour. So what they're saying here is that education in the form of providing people with knowledge and information doesn't always lead to behaviour change. And in actual fact, that behaviour change could come from a completely different set of influences than education. And what they unpick in this article is what some of those other influences might be. And this is a bit of a high-level summary from another academic, you don't need to worry about who that academic is, who looks at some of the different categories of influencer on human behaviour. And you'll see that education is really not a primary focus. In actual fact, could sit behind some of these, but it's not a major influencer in many cases. So what we've just looked at there, I suppose, is challenging this idea that behaviour change comes from education in every circumstance, and that providing people with information and knowledge will lead to behaviour change. Now, there are actually some educators in the space of environment for education for sustainability, who are uncomfortable with the idea that education should be seen as a vehicle for behaviour change. And one of those academics is a gentleman called Ian Walls. And his paper, Learning Our Way to Sustainability, is the second of the papers that I'd like you to read for this module, where he looks at education almost on two extremes. And he looks at education either as being instrumental education, namely it's education for something, much like Bob Jickling argued a number of modules ago in a paper that you read. So this idea of education for behaviour change. And he's uncomfortable with it because he thinks you could very quickly run the risk of indoctrinating people. And it's very difficult to be clear on what the behaviours should be in every context. So he looks at education for sustainability from an instrumental perspective as well as from an emancipatory perspective. And he asked the question, should education for sustainability change behaviours, or should it in fact focus on building capacity and critical thinking and reflexivity and resilience and so forth in our students? And where do we lie? So what we've actually done here is we've challenged the relationship between education and behaviour change. And it's an important challenge for us because as we start to look at this issue of education and sustainability, a lot of times education is viewed as a vehicle to change people's behaviours for sustainability. And yet there's questions about whether it in fact can actually do that. And then there's questions about whether education should in fact be for that. So in a way, these two articles come at this issue from two ends of the spectrum, and I'd like you to explore those two ends of the spectrum. There's two optional resources for you to look at as well if you have the time and the interest. The first is a recorded webinar, and I have the link for you on the Moodle page, which I gave to a group of organisations on behaviour change, which looks in more detail at different influences of behaviour change and talks about some of the first steps to take when designing a behaviour change program. And education may only be a part of that, if at all. The second is another paper by Walls and other colleagues where they explore really the relationship between instrumental and emancipatory education. And they're not arguing for one or the other. What they're arguing for is different forms appropriate for different changes. And I quite like it because it gives a more nuanced approach to this relationship between education from an emancipatory perspective as well as education from an instrumental perspective, namely to create behaviour change. And it says that neither is bad, and each one of them could be used at different circumstances for different intentions. So those are the two optional readings that I'd like you to look at. Now, in terms of what I'd like you to do once you've actually, or some of the learning activities I'd like you to go through once you've engaged with the readings. The first of the learning activities is for you to actually pick and follow a new sustainability behaviour for 5 days. Pick any behaviour, it doesn't matter what it is, as long as it's an action, and as long as it's something new and that's related to sustainability. This could be eating only vegetarian for a week. This could be taking only public transport for a week. This could be purchasing fair trade products only for a week. Pick a behaviour related to sustainability that you've often thought you'd like to do, but have never had the time or the inclination to do it, and follow that for 5 days. And while you're following that, reflect on the process. What helped you follow that behaviour? What made it hard to follow that behaviour? And where for you did education as you understand it fit in? Where in this journey of 5 days of you adopting and adapting this behaviour did education come into it? If you're feeling brave, if you're feeling ambitious, get someone else to do the same, to adopt a behaviour with you for 5 days. And reflect on the process that you see them going through. What made it hard? What made it easy? And where did education fit in? And then last, what I'd like you to think about is what can educators that are interested in this education and sustainability issue, what can we learn from this area of behaviour change and human psychology? How may it impact our own practice and thinking in this space? What might we take on board? What might we reject as well? Now, all these activities, all the readings are accessible through the Moodle page as usual. Please engage with the readings critically. Engage with the learning activities. Have fun. They're a chance for you to explore this particular issue from a more hands-on way. And then I look forward to your thoughts, your comments, your ideas, your questions in the discussion forum as usual. So this brings us to the conclusion of this overview for Module 6 for this particular unit. We've gone through the overview of the module. I've taken you through the readings. I've taken you through the learning activities. And I encourage you, as always, to bring your thinking, your challenges, your questions to the discussion forum. If you have any questions that you have to ask of me directly, any confusions, any issues, please email me on this email address, or put a post in through the discussion forums, and I'll try and respond to it as soon as possible. Thank you very much, and I very much look forward to hearing your thoughts.